Hi, everyone. We are Group 3, and we decided to do our project on the COVID meat shortage. So just as a quick overview, at the beginning stages of the pandemic, the US went through a little bit of a meat shortage and a pork shortage specifically, but this was due for this was due to the mass infections at a lot of very large pork packing plants that caused them to be unable to fulfill CDC guidelines and then therefore have to close down. And one reason or one compounding cause that uh, exas- many experts believe helped to exacerbate this problem was the sheer amount of consolidation that has happened within the meat processing industry. And some of the solutions that we've decided to focus in on work to decrease this consolidation by supporting small and mid-sized meat packers so that they are able to take away or help support larger packers, um, and take some of the market share and overall just diffuse processing in general with meat. So as a quick history lesson on pork packing and processing consolidation, um, this largely happened in the 80s and 90s due to a couple key reasons, namely changes with worker relations to their employing company, um, also along with some processing shifts and production shifts. But these changes helped large companies really consolidate their plants, um, both in terms of the market sphere and in terms of the amount of how much of the processing is done in large plants. So as you can see with this graph upper right, with pork processing, it went from in 1930 or 1980 from 34% of pork processing by the four largest firms to around 68% in 2015. And you can even see this with how much of it is done in these very large plants. 63% of it was done in 1980 and 88% of it was done in 1997. So with the changes of worker relations, the main thing to notice is unionization. So pre-1970, large plants were highly unionized, and therefore their workers had a much higher wage than you might find at a small town processing plant or butcher. But this basically meant that for these extremely large companies, as they increase their volume, the wage costs that are required to achieve that volume were much larger than at some a smaller processor, and that created a diseconomy where it created a very large barrier for a lot of these companies and prevented them from becoming too big pre 1970. But in the 1980s, deunionization efforts from the companies along helped reduce the wages at these large plants and then therefore remove the advantage that these small processors had over the large plants and allow these large plants to take over. So there were some other factors that helped make this change to a more centralized processing system. For example, the shift away from retail processing before the advent of like factory farming, a lot of your meat was processed at retail locations such as grocery stores, butchers, that kind of thing. Um, but this is not the case anymore. Most of it is processed in a plant and then shipped to a retailer to be sold. A couple other things: the establishment of large feedlots and technology changes really solidified that um, solidified that scale economy that helps large businesses stay large and get larger. They're able to afford technology. They can better utilize benefits with large uh, pork farmers and a couple and more reasons. There are some other reasons that helped with shift to this factory farming kind of thing, such as regulations, but those were the sort of main ones.
So the current status quo of the whole processing arena, mainly pork. The processing is highly centralized, as Michael said. There's few small to medium-sized processors, and they hold way less of the market share of what is processed, as he said before. And 27 states are not regulated for interstate commerce, so these small processors have a harder time shipping things across state lines. Next slide, please. What are the pros of having a highly centralized whole packing process? It's highly efficient. So there's many processes that were built around these bigger plants. Obviously, the bigger plants can have better assembly lines and more workers working at once. They can have more machinery because they have more capital to invest in said machinery. They have more animals going in and out daily, and it's very highly mechanized. So it's just a very well-oiled machine. The cost reduction for processors and consumers is very good because it is an economy of scale. As they highly mechanize and get better equipment and better processes, they get more bang for their buck. So, and that gets passed on to the consumer. So more output for less input of resources. They have better access, or they cause better access to school lunch programs and other affordable foods. So obviously lower cost foods give more people the option to buy them and less inequity with food buying. And then there's a better ability to update technology and adapt to demands because of the capital I stated before. And they would like to do that because then they are complying with the regulations that are built around them, such as environmental laws, policies, permits, etc., because they have so many institutions watching out because they are such a large entity. So they have a lot more accountability, really. Next slide, please. What are the cons? There's disproportionate effects when disrupted. So when something like the pandemic happens, there's a more likely chance that they will be disrupted. And if the disruption occurs for an extended amount of time, there's a huge backup of the system since it is so efficient. It gets animals in and out. There's a lot of people taking animals to those places, and they go straight to the consumer after that almost because of their shelf life. So when that happens, they shut down. There's less workers working, or there's no workers working, and these animals can't get processed, and therefore they can't be taken to the processing plants. So they stay at the farmer's farm, which can be a bad thing when they are ready to go. When they are grown, they're ready to be slaughtered. The farmers don't have the resources to keep them, and life must go on, but it cannot because of the backup. Monopolies have been studied for a long time in economics, and they have huge downfalls. It creates a system in their favor often because they have the connections, the capital to be on the better side of policy, meaning they can update their stuff with environmental regulations and other demands from policymakers as well as consumers. But this can cause a major crash if they get too large, like we've seen with the hog meat pandemic shortage. So, and it causes less market resiliency and a longer recovery because they have such a huge market share. They also have a huge power concentration. So, like I said before, this can cause bigger systems around them, and then also a huger impact when they are affected negatively. So they can be the weak links. Next slide. So this is a normal working system and an also dysfunctional system in red, with the functioning in green. Markets, farmers get their stuff from markets or buy based off of markets. And then the farmer or producer grows it. They take it to the processor. The processors then pack it and treat it however necessary. And then the packers take it to a wholesaler or a retailer, or the wholesaler takes it to a retailer, and then it gets to the consumer eventually. So this is a highly efficient system, and people get their needs met, and it's not bad at all, really. But when the COVID pandemic happens, there's sick employees or restrictions put on plants. There's large plants shutdowns because they don't have enough employees or they can't uphold to the restrictions. There's a shortage of animal products, higher food prices, unaffordable food, and then strained budgets and hunger and poverty because they are not able to get affordable foods out, and the prices go up naturally as people still need to eat. And then there's also animals and products not going to processors, which leads to spilt milk in fields, culling in mass, just not a good situation. A lot of waste and wasted resources. Next slide, please. So you can see that more so in this diagram. Instead of the normal process, it doesn't go to processors. And then you see concerns with animal rights and welfare, rightfully so, because there's mass slaughters and waste. And then there's concerns with the food system, rightfully so, because why are these animals not only going to waste, but we are having food shortages? This doesn't make sense. And then wasted eggs, wasted milk, and all that stuff that we produced took other resources to produce. So that also kind of went to waste, which is no good. And agriculture kind of naturally has some degradation qualities to it, depending on how sustainable it is. So naturally, when those resources are taken, they're no longer there, they're degraded, whatever, they kind of spill over. And so there's not only is there less resources than before, there's less resources to use on other things, and there's less resources of things such as like lower standards for the animals existing. Next slide, please.
In the past year, we saw a lot of regulation and deregulation in meat plants. Right away, meat plants were declared essential. We saw some rollback on accountability, for example, OSHA inspections. We saw requirements on social distancing, sanitation, and mask wear. Meat plant workers were declared essential and were encouraged to work. They're incentivized with a boost in salary or risk pay. There was a lack of sick worker support in the meat industry. We also saw how meat plants lacked the infrastructure built for pandemics. More people contracted COVID at meat plants, which led to large processing camps to shut down or function at smaller capacities. Next slide. So we think decentralizing may be the answer. During the shutdown of larger plants to the outbreak of COVID, the state of Minnesota took effort on small and mid-sized facilities to pick up production of meat. So our first recommendation is using smaller and mid-sized plants. We also recommend having more grants to support these mid-sized and small processing plants and expand the current agri-value added program, have the grants reform plants, facilities to meet safety standards, and have better technology and other infrastructure like better air ventilation. And that's it.
Are there any questions?